everyone, welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel Pisces Paperbacks, and today I want to talk about audiobooks. First of all, I'd like to say my new lights with this tripod, this setup, it's incredible. I look amazing. To the point of this video, I want to talk about audiobooks because I feel like they've transformed my reading habits like a lot, especially within the last couple of months. And I want to talk a little bit about them and then also give a couple recommendations on ones that I particularly liked. So let's get into it. I had never listened to an audiobook before last summer. I was under the impression that I wouldn't really like them. I wouldn't be able to pay attention or absorb the information. I have a lot of attention things going on up here, and I was just convinced that they wouldn't work for me. So I decided to check them out last year because I found out about Libby and I was like, oh, I love the library, but I can't go that often because I don't live near my library where I have the library card. And I was going on a pretty long drive, so I decided to download an audiobook and listen to it on the way there. And that audiobook was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So I kind of listened to like the best thing I could have for like the very first one, because not only is The Poet X narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo, the narrator, but it's also a novel in verse, and specifically kind of in the style of slam poetry, which I particularly like. So it was just like, it was the best of everything that could have happened for me, and I ended up loving it. And then I listened to my second audiobook, which is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs, and I fucking hated it. Not only did I dislike the narrator, but I didn't really like the book, which I don't know why I read the entire series then. I don't know what's going on up there. So, you know, ups and downs right at the start, but over the last year, especially when I got a job where I had a fairly long commute, Elsa's making noise. Being able to listen to books while I was driving to work for 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes every day really kind of changed everything, because otherwise I wouldn't have had time to read, and I got through so many books like that. This year I have just not been able to hold my attention span long enough until recently to like read books physically again, and I was working a fairly simple retail job and they let us wear earbuds in at my job, so I started listening to audiobooks at work, and I have read more this month so far in October than like the last 3 months, and it just kind of really made me realize how much I love audiobooks. I absorb, I would say, just as much information. Reading comprehension is equal than reading it physically, except maybe names. I think that's the one thing I kind of struggle with audiobooks, is remembering character names and place names. Something about hearing them but not reading them with my eyes just makes them a little bit harder to remember. But in terms of story beats, character development, dialogue, like I say it's equal to reading things physically. I just love them. I think everyone should listen to them. And it's like, people are like, yeah, I don't like audiobooks, but I love podcasts. And I especially love podcasts where it's a scripted podcast where it's telling me a story. And I'm just like, I don't get it there. I'm not really making the connection that you're making, but I just think everyone should try them. So I have a real quick list of 10 books that I particularly like on audio, and I want to share those recommendations with you. The first genre of books I want to talk about are nonfiction. So just in general, I'd like to say that I've never been a person who really read nonfiction. I couldn't keep my attention. It didn't matter if it was a memoir, essays, just like a history of something, if it was, I don't know, something like more academic. Like it's never been able to keep my attention. However, I've been listening to so many nonfiction books, especially in the last couple months, and I really, really enjoy them. It does feel like a podcast to me, like an educational podcast, and I actually do feel like I'm absorbing the information. It's holding my attention because I don't have to like stare at the pages and try to understand what's going on. I could just have someone explain something to me verbally, and that just works so much better for me. So just in general, I will basically always be reading nonfiction through audio. However, specifically, and I think a lot of people will agree with me on this, memoirs are incredible to listen to through audiobook because many times they're read by the author or by the person who's writing the memoir about themselves. And I just think that there's something so special about hearing someone explain their own life story to you. It just feels more personal. They can deliver the book the way they imagined it being read or being understood, and that just feels really special to me. So I have 3 kind of memoir-esque books that I'd like to recommend, specifically to listen to on audio. The first is definitely a very popular memoir that I think a lot of people recommend on audiobook, and that is Becoming by Michelle Obama. I have heard from people who read it physically that they could like tell when the different ghostwriters were writing different sections of the book, and I did not feel that at all when I was listening to it. It was extremely emotional and personal, and I felt very connected to Michelle Obama as she was reading, and I just think that that is like a fantastic memoir, a fantastic audiobook. Secondly, I'd like to recommend Little Weirds by Jenny Slate. This one's a little different because while it is based on events in her own life, it's more of like a creative nonfiction book, and a lot of it is written, I believe, in a way that feels like poetry, a little surrealist. And I think hearing Jenny Slate, because she does narrate her own audiobook, read these stories to you, it helps a lot with the delivery, because I don't know if I would have gotten the nuances of her sentences and her stories just as perfect as the way that she says it. So I really, really loved that book. I really loved that audiobook. The last nonfiction book I want to recommend is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and that's specifically because this book is a letter that he's writing to his son. So I think because it's, you know, supposed to be this letter to someone that he cares about, listening to him read this letter out loud is really impactful and really emotional, and I think it really enhances the delivery of the content of the book. Moving on to fiction, obviously I want to start with The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. She narrates all of her books, and her audiobooks are fantastic. This book follows a young Afro-Latina girl in New York as she's kind of becoming a woman and kind of coming to understand what womanhood and religion and her relationship with her mother and all her relationship with her friends is kind of going to mean going forward. I absolutely love that book. She also reads the audiobook for all 3 of her novels. The Poet X is my favorite of the 3, and I didn't listen to the audiobook of the second book, but I did listen to the audiobook of her most recent novel, Clap When You Land, and while it wasn't my favorite of her 3 books, I still think that the audiobook was exceptional. Next, and the book that really made me want to make this video, is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I have not stopped talking about this book this whole month so far because I just loved it so much, and I loved listening to the audiobook because they speak Spanish in the book and I don't speak Spanish, and if I was just reading it, I don't think I would have gotten the nuance of the inflection and the language as wonderful as the audiobook does. It is read by a trans Latinx narrator, which I think is fantastic because the main character is a trans Latinx boy, and there are just some moments in there where the speaking of Spanish is like an important emotional character beat, and listening to the words, even if I don't understand exactly, like I can figure out the meaning, but if I don't understand exactly what they're saying, it just meant so much to hear it read, and it was just so fantastic. And I love this book so much. Please read it. The next audiobook I want to recommend is for Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So this book is more of a fairy tale, and I think that's what really enhanced the audiobook experience for me. A lot of this book is really rooted in folk tales, folk traditions, and fairy tales, and I think that having those read kind of like evokes like being read a story book at night, or you know, being a kid and telling stories with your friends or your cousins or your siblings. And I love this book. I specifically love the magic in this book. The magic is just so wonderful, and I loved hearing about this magic being brought to life verbally. It was just wonderful. Next, I want to talk about American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This book I want to recommend specifically because I listened to, I don't know if it has a different version, but I listened to the 10th anniversary edition, which has a full cast narration, which this is the first and only full cast narration I've ever read, and I loved it. I loved hearing the different voices. It really brought everything to life in an interesting, fun, and compelling way. I specifically loved the main character, Shadow. I loved his voice narrator, so that also helped. But I just thought this book was just so fun to listen to, and I think having all of the character voices made the audiobook go by faster because it was a pretty long one. That one took me a while to listen to. Next is Nevermoor, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend, which I have right over here. And I listened to this. It's a middle grade fantasy. I listened to it on audiobook in like January and absolutely loved it. The sound effects, kind of the world building that's brought in by the production of the audiobook, the voices, just the everything. I loved this also because it's like a middle grade fantasy, has that sort of whimsical, almost fairy tale-esque unbelievability kind of vibe that I think is also really enhanced by verbal storytelling. Same as with Uprooted, but that's an adult fantasy, so, you know, different energy, but kind of like same energy in my head. I don't know if anybody else would agree with me, but either way, I recommend Nevermoor a lot. I love that book a lot. Almost at the end, second to last, I want to talk about The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This book is about a group of indigenous young men possibly being hunted by the vengeful spirit of an elk. And I really like this book because a lot of the content of the book is characters telling stories to each other, and I think hearing those stories told verbally, again, really enhances the kind of scary story around the campfire feeling that this book gives me, and I love the book. The book is beautifully written, and I love the story and the message that it's telling, and it was very scary too. So good horror pick for the season if that's what you're interested in. And lastly, I want to talk about an audiobook that, is it good or do I just have a soft spot for it? And that is Halfway to the Grave by Jeaniene Frost. I gotta say, I almost stopped listening to these real quick when in the first book because the main male character, Bones, has the worst British accent I've ever heard. It's so abrasive and like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins is like what it evokes for me. It's so terrible. I literally was like, what, half an hour into the first book, and I paused it and I texted my friend Hannah and I was like, girl, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this to myself. And I pushed through, I kept listening, and I got to the 6th book. I still have to read the 7th one, which is the last one in the series, but by the 6th book, I have such a soft spot in my heart for Bones and his stupid voice, and I can't imagine him any other way, and it just grows on you. It grows on you to the point where you're just like, yes, talk like that to me, man. You sound so weird, but I love it. And that is an audiobook series that really holds a special place in my heart, despite it being like on the series kind of quality. It's still a series that I enjoy so much, and that is a vampire paranormal romance series. If that's not what you're into, then maybe you wouldn't like the books, but if you're looking for some sexy vampire hunter romance stuff, that is the series for you. Alright, that is going to be 10 books that I think you would particularly like on audio. I've been listening to so many books on audiobook, it's hard to tell which ones are good audiobooks and which ones are just good books that I liked and I listened to them on audio. But I think these 10 specifically are ones where the audiobook experience enhanced the reading experience and made me love it even more. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you're listening to an audiobook right now, what is it? If you've listened to any really good audiobooks lately, please recommend them to me. I'm always looking for good ones, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!